Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Brutal gangsters Reggie and Ronnie had a string of A-list contacts, but also befriended serial killers and faced rumours of a shocking incestuous relationship. How the Kray twins went from mum's lovely boys to the most evil men in Britain. London gangsters and classic narcissists Ronnie and Reggie Kray went from teen boxers to the most notorious criminals of the decade, and wined and dined a number of celebs. Why the Kray twins were the most feared fellas in 1960s London. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. The Kray twins' debauched legend. From knockout punch trick to celeb pals and scandalous secret. Gangsters Ronnie and Reggie Kray are some of the underworld's most well-known criminals. Books have been written and films made about the identical twins over the years. Ronald Kray was an English gangster from the 1960s. He, along with his twin brother Reginald, was the most famous and brutal criminal of the time. They built a real empire through terrible crime and violence, but at the same time they were active in the social life, surrounding themselves with celebrities and partying like they were part of the high society. They owned a club in the West End and organised parties attended by all sorts of famous people, including politicians. Even though many of their crimes were committed in plain sight, authorities couldn't touch them because all potential witnesses were too scared to talk. But that ended on May 8, 1968, when Detective Superintendent Leonard Nipper Reed arrested them. They were convicted, and Ronald spent the rest of his life at Broadmoor Hospital as he had been certified insane. Ronnie and Reggie Kray are the archetypical British gangsters, up there with American anti-heroes like Al Scarface Capone, Johnny Torrio and Lucky Luciano. Two blockbuster biopics have presented the twins as violent and troubled rogues, whose criminality and ruthlessness is still tempered with some sense that they were not as bad as modern criminals are today. They only hurt their own, and they were nice to their mum, Violet Kray, so the story goes, and they didn't deal in drugs. Let's start with some of the facts about Ronnie and Reggie before considering quite why it is we remain so fascinated with them 50 years after their arrest. Ronald Ronnie Kray was born on October 24, 1933 in Hoxton, East London, 10 minutes after his twin brother Reggie. His entire life was closely connected to that of his brother, as they not only shared a birthday, but also a career in crime. The twins grew up in the East End of London, going to school in Brick Lane. They were very much a product of the mixed demography of Whitechapel and Spitalfields, with English, Jewish, Irish and Romany Gypsy ancestors. The East End was somewhere you survived more than lived in the 1930s. This was an area long associated with poverty, overcrowding, immigration and crime. They were once called the most evil men in Britain, and were by a distance the most infamous gangsters the East End has ever produced. Murderers, torturers, hardened criminals, but to their mother Violet, twins Ronnie and Reggie Kray were her lovely boys. The Krays' cruel streak is said to stem from their turbulent upbringing, which saw them clash with their abusive dad. His parents were Charles David Kray and Violent Annie Lee, and had a 6-year-old brother named Charles James, Charlie, and a sister who had died before their birth. Charlie never received the same fame as his violent brothers, although he was convicted of a huge cocaine smuggling plot worth nearly £40 million and was consequently jailed for 12 years at the tender age of 70. The twins contracted diphtheria at an early age, and while Reggie recovered quickly, Ronnie suffered from complications and nearly died. Because his condition was so serious, they kept him isolated in the hospital until his mother decided she would take him home and take care of him herself. After rejoining his brother, Ronnie miraculously made a quick recovery, but the damage done by the illness was permanent and led to mental problems when he grew up. They attended Wood Close School and then Daniel Street School, but that would not be the foundation for their future life. Instead, they were inspired by their grandfather, Jimmy Cannonball Lee, to begin boxing, and got quite good at it. They participated in the London Schools Boxing Championship and even made it to the finals. Ronnie was more aggressive and unpredictable than his brother, but in one fight against Reggie he suffered a serious head injury that was considered a reason for his mental instability later on. When they moved to Bethnal Green from nearby Hoxton as children, Ronnie and Reggie quickly became involved in juvenile crime. They kept boxing, but Ronnie's brutality went beyond the boxing ring as he wanted to fight anyone who would annoy him. The twins became involved with violence and street gangs very early in their lives, and even a spell of national service in 1952 did little to tame them. In 1952 they were drafted for the national service, ran away and got caught and turned over to the army after having punched the corporal in charge. They went to prison where they behaved so badly that they were dishonourably discharged from the army. They lost all their boxing careers because they had a criminal record. They bought a snooker hall in Mile End and by the end of the 1950s were well-established local gangsters with a reputation for violence. But the boys were not content to be one of several gangsters. They wanted to be the firm in London. As the post-war austerity gave way to the swinging 60s, Ronnie and Reggie became part of the London scene. Their West End nightclub attracted the stars of the day, many of whom enjoyed the infamy of being pictured with the Krays. For the twins themselves, their celebrity status gave them so much needed respectability within London society. In the 1950s they first moved into protection, demanding money with menaces from businesses who would face reprisals for not paying up, and it paid off handsomely for the twins. By the following decade their firm had spread its operations west, opening gambling club Esmeralda's Barn in wealthy Knightsbridge. There they wined and dined celebrities including Judy Garland and Barbara Windsor, who flocked to the club. Their status of club owners made them famous and brought them to the heights of London's social life. They socialised with politicians, lords, actors, and were photographed in their company by David Bailey. It's unclear how the Krays came to be proprietors of the Knightsbridge bar Esmeralda's Barn, but the club increased the brothers' influence in the West End. The legalisation of gambling in 1960 made them a visible presence, rubbing shoulders with international celebrities, including Frank Sinatra. Ronnie said in his autobiography, "They were the best years of our lives." Unusually for their era, and even more so in the criminal underworld, Ronnie was openly homosexual, while Reggie was rumoured to be bisexual. Reggie's marriage to Frances Shay was a sham. That poor girl was a trophy wife, nothing more. Shay and Reggie married in 1965. 2 years later she killed herself. It has been suggested that one of the brothers forced her to take the pills that killed her. Homosexuality was nothing to be proud of in the East End, but as they became more and more notorious, Ronnie became quite shameless about it. Rumours that notorious gangster Kray and Lord Boothby, a popular TV presenter and former MP for East Aberdeenshire, were having an affair were published in 1964. The Sunday Mirror, which did not name the pair, claimed to have a photo of Kray and Boothby together with the bisexual peer's chauffeur and lover Leslie Holt. Lord Boothby publicly denied having a homosexual or any other close relationship with Kray. At the time he said the photograph showed them discussing business matters, dismissing rumours about his personal life as a tissue of atrocious lies. Boothby threatened the Mirror with a lawsuit, obtaining £40,000, $62,000, and an unqualified apology. Press coverage quickly petered out. But Home Secretary Henry Brooke was so concerned about the matter he summoned the head of MI5, Sir Roger Hollis, to ask what the security services knew. Brooke feared the allegations might erupt into a scandal to rival the Profumo affair, which helped to bring down the Conservative government of Harold Macmillan. Sir Roger told the Home Secretary how MI5 had received reports that Lord Boothby was bisexual and had contacts with the Krays. But since he had no access to official secrets, MI5 concluded that Boothby's private life was of no concern, the papers reveal. According to an MI5 source, Lord Boothby was in a relationship with Holt, his chauffeur and ex-boxer, who also went by the name Johnny Kidd. Holt told the source how Lord Boothby and Kray had been to a couple of parties together. In the event, Boothby paid Holt £2,000, let him keep the Jaguar, and the lid stayed shut on the peer's secret life. The report suggested the Sunday Mirror was tipped off about the affair between Lord Boothby and Kray by the rival Nash gang. The MI5 report said, "Certainly the suggestion that Boothby had been having an affair with the gangster Kray is hardly true." Dr. Richard Dunley, record specialist at the National Archive, said the story was one of the greatest scandals that never was. If this had come out in 1964, it would have been a huge scandal, he said. The Kray twins stayed at Shepton Mallet Prison for a month to await court-martial after they assaulted a police officer who had tried to arrest them for being absent without leave while in the British Army. The pair had been called up to do national service in the Royal Fusiliers in March 1952, but had attempted to leave within only a few minutes of arriving at their depot. While here they encountered their future rivals, Charlie Richardson and George Cornell, who Ronnie Kray later shot. Then one day Reggie decided to kill Jack the Hat McVitie, who had failed to fulfill a contract to kill somebody for the Krays. Allegedly egged on by his brother Reggie, invited McVitie to a party that wasn't actually happening, and when McVitie arrived, Reggie tried to shoot him in the head. The gun didn't fire, so he stabbed McVitie to death. In 1969, the twins were sentenced to life in prison. Not after their 1968 arrest, but way back in 1952, the twins were held at the Tower for a few days due to failing to report for national service. They were among the last prisoners ever to be held there. Their sentences of a 30-year non-parole period were the longest sentences ever passed at the Old Bailey. The famous criminal court in central London was the setting of Reggie and Ronnie Kray's 1969 trial, which saw them both receive life imprisonment for the murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie. The jury deliberated for 7 hours and delivered unanimous verdicts of guilt against the Krays and 7 of their accomplices, including their older brother, Charlie Kray Jr. The twins ran a business from jail. Being put away for murder certainly didn't curb Ronnie and Reggie's entrepreneurial zeal. While cooped up, they set up and ran a business called Kray-Lee Enterprises, which supplied bodyguards and protection services to some very famous people. According to a business card confiscated at Broadmoor Hospital, where Ronnie was being held, their company provided personal aids to the Hollywood stars and Arab noblemen. It seemed to work. One client was Frank Sinatra, who hired an entourage of Kray-Lee bodyguards when he attended Wimbledon in 1985. Some of the Krays' other business ideas, such as manufacturing a gadget to slice the tops off boiled eggs, weren't quite so successful. It is said Reggie, the charming one, could have been a straight businessman, but his brother's psychotic tendencies made that impossible, although his temper would oscillate according to the dose of Stemetil he was getting. It sometimes felt like he had 2 personalities, which only made people fear him more. Ronald Kray lived with undiagnosed schizophrenia for most of his life. When the twins were eventually sentenced in 1964, Ronnie served his sentence at the secure mental health facility Broadmoor Hospital. Reggie was no gentleman either, reportedly having a surefire way to break a jaw in one hit. Dubbed the cigarette punch, it would see him offer his victim a fag before striking as they opened their mouth, leaving them writhing in pain. As their mouth was open, breaking the jaw was almost guaranteed. Ronnie died of a heart attack in 1995 at Broadmoor Hospital, where he was held after being certified insane. Reggie was released from prison in 2000 when he was diagnosed with cancer. He died soon after. Ruling London with an iron grip during the 1960s, their blend of violence and glamour still fascinates us today. The Krays were very able manipulators. There is still a fascination with them, and the organised crime associated with them from the 1960s. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of the Kray twins? It is interesting to imagine Reggie could have been a straight businessman without his brother's psychotic tendencies.